I've been using the DJI Pocket 3 to film my vlogs, talking head videos, and B-roll clips for the past 10 months. And in that time, I've come up with quite a few tips and tricks on how to best use this camera. This is a follow-up to my original video where I shared 17 tips and tricks for the Pocket 3. And these are techniques that I use pretty regularly with my DJI Pocket 3. Tip number 1 is how to use the Pocket 3 without a tripod. So in order to connect the Pocket 3 to a tripod, you have to carry around that 1/4 nub that is so easy to misplace or forget to pack with you. It's actually one of my most common mistakes that I make when filming with this camera is not bringing that little nub with me. So if you do forget that adapter, you actually don't need a tripod or a mount to set up this camera. Instead, you can just put the Pocket 3 in a flat surface and reposition the camera on the gimbal. By the way, whenever I do use a mini tripod for the Pocket 3, I very rarely use that tiny little tripod that comes with the camera. Instead, I like this PGY-TECH mini extension tripod because it's a little bit bigger, so it gives me a better hand grip for the camera, but it can also extend, so I can use it as a selfie stick. For tip number 2, it has to do with the menu and how you navigate it. So whenever you're inside of, say, the settings page and you get pretty deep within the menu, you have this back button in the upper left corner where you can tap on the touchscreen to go back. But did you know that you can also just press the button on the joystick and that also takes you back? I actually didn't know this until yesterday, so this is a brand new tip even for me. But it's kind of nice if you want to avoid using the touchscreen to go back. Tip number 3 is how to lock your exposure. This is something that I mainly use whenever I'm doing reveal shots to get cinematic B-roll, but you may want to do this if you see your exposure jumping around a lot when you're shooting. So there's 2 ways to do it. Within the camera, set up your camera to the scene that you want to shoot and swipe right on the LCD. Go over to exposure, and when it's in auto, see what the shutter speed currently is. Switch the camera over to manual and input that shutter speed, and that will keep your exposure locked. The second way to lock exposure on the DJI Pocket 3 is to connect it to the DJI Mimo phone app. When you connect it to the phone app, you're able to use your screen on your phone to preview your shot as well as to control your settings. And so this is really helpful because it unlocks a few extra settings, including exposure lock. So if you just tap and hold on the subject on your phone screen, that locks your exposure, which is pretty similar to how it works if you're trying to do that on your phone. So DJI, if you're listening, it would be really great to incorporate something like this on the Pocket 3 itself so that we could lock the exposure on the Pocket 3's actual LCD screen without having to go into manual exposure settings or connect it to the Mimo phone app. Now earlier, I mentioned reveal shots as a way to make your footage look more cinematic. If you want to learn more about how to make your video look cinematic, then the sponsor of today's video could really help you out. Skillshare is an online community with thousands of classes taught by industry professionals. You can learn not only how to compose cinematic shots, but also filmmaking basics, including lighting and audio techniques, and how to use video storytelling in social media. This summer, it's my goal to refine my YouTube video creation process. So I've been enrolled in the Skillshare class taught by Marquez Brownlee, or MKBHD if you're familiar with him. I really admire him because he does tech reviews like I do, but on a much larger scale. So I feel like there's a lot to learn from him, and I've been pretty excited to take his course on Skillshare. So if you also want to work on your professional or personal development this summer, then I really recommend trying Skillshare. Use my link down below, and the first 500 people to use it will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. And with that, let's talk about tip number 4 for the DJI Pocket 3. Now, when you're making your cinematic reveal shots, you might notice that your focus is a little bit jumpy. This is definitely not cinematic or visually pleasing, but there is a way to possibly fix it in camera. So within the Pocket 3, go over to your LCD screen and swipe right, and check on your focus setting. Odds are you probably have it set to continuous or product showcase, and this is what's making your focus be all jumpy. The solution is to choose single focus mode. Then you want to tap to focus on the final thing in the shot that you want to be in focus. I think this looks so much better. Tip number 5, it has to do with exposure adjustments. Whenever I'm shooting outdoors, I tend to underexpose my footage or shoot a little bit darker because it's much easier to recover a dark shot than it is an overexposed or overly bright shot. But sometimes I want to make adjustments to my exposure on the go as I'm filming. So if you're already filming, just go up to the Pocket 3's LCD and swipe right, and you'll be able to adjust the EV or the exposure value as you're filming. I'll go ahead and show you right now. So if I want to go brighter, I can do that, or I can even go darker, but I'm gonna go back right in the middle to the sweet spot there. So very simple to do in camera as you're filming, which I really like. There's not many cameras out there that can do this besides regular point and shoot or mirrorless cameras. Tip number 6 is actually a photo tip. Now, I typically don't shoot a lot of photos with the Pocket 3, even though it can shoot photos. But after learning this trick, it's made me start to want to shoot more photos with this camera. But the trick is how to do a long exposure photo within the Pocket 3. A long exposure is great to take whenever there's motion in your scene, like this waterfall. If you do a long exposure, the moving parts will appear silky smooth. So to do this within the Pocket 3, first go over to photo mode, then swipe right on the LCD and hit exposure. You want to enable manual exposure and make sure your ISO is as low as it goes, and try to get your shutter speed to be as low as it goes as well. Now at this point, you might notice that your shot is pretty overexposed. It's really bright, you maybe can't even see anything. So that's when you would want to use an ND filter. ND filters are like sunglasses for your camera. They darken the overall shot. And so there are different degrees of ND filters like ND32, ND64, there's even ND1000. So it takes some experimenting to figure out which ND filter power is going to be best for your shot. And the final tip is to use the Pocket 3 to do a fake drone shot. So I don't know about where you guys live, but here in Seattle, it's becoming harder and harder to find legal places to fly your drone. It's to the point where I don't even own a drone anymore. I've sold them all because I just can't use them. So if you want to do a drone-like shot, you can actually use the Pocket 3 to do that. All you need is the Pocket 3 plus a selfie stick or a monopod, ideally a pretty long one. I personally like the little selfie sticks from Insta360 because they are lightweight, affordable, and they get pretty tall. So besides attaching the Pocket 3 to that selfie stick, you also want to change a couple of settings in camera. I would change the gimbal mode to tilt lock to keep the horizon level at all times, and I would also choose a slightly higher frame rate, such as 30 frames per second, but ideally at least 60 frames per second, or even 120 frames per second slow motion. Next, extend that selfie stick and start moving. You can walk forwards or backwards, and while you're doing that, you can raise or lower the gimbal very slowly. This is why I recommend shooting in a higher frame rate, because it is very hard to get that smooth, slow motion by yourself. It's a lot easier to slow it down either in post-production or in camera. Those are 7 additional tips and tricks for the DJI Pocket 3. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, I did do an original tips and tricks video with 17 techniques. And if you want to check that out, I'll leave a link in the description below. Thanks so much for watching. Leave me any comments or questions down below. And also, if you have other tips and tricks that I have not covered yet, then I would love to hear about them. So let me know. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.